So my first visit to the immigration courthouse as a witness, I was sitting in the courtroom and I was watching as people were pleading their immigration cases. And there was a young man sitting next to me, and I had that feeling that we all sometimes get where I just felt like I should let him know I was there. And so I reached out and I tapped him on the shoulder and I said hi, and he looked puzzled, and finally he took my phone and he used Google Translate to ask me if I worked at the courthouse. And I said, no, no. And I pointed to my clerical collar, which I only wear when I'm doing some kind of social justice demonstration or this sort of courthouse witnessing. And then he smiled. He grinned when he realized that I was there for him, people like him, for people who were going through the process. So we talked a little bit more, and I learned that he had been in the country for less than a year. I learned that he did not have an attorney. And I learned that he didn't have anybody that he could give me as an emergency contact. Now, this recipe is one designed for disaster. The judges have been pressured to dismiss cases whenever they can. And when cases are dismissed, now these are cases for people who are going through the process, who are doing what they think they need to do to receive legal recognition to be in this country. And they're going through the process. They're showing up at the courthouse like this young man with every good intention. And then their cases are dismissed. And then when they exit the courtroom, there are ICE agents waiting to take them. They grab them. They don't identify themselves. They just grab these folks and whisk them down a back stairway and out into a white van where they are then taken to some kind of detention center. So I'm sitting next to this young man and I'm realizing that he is going to be targeted by the ICE agents who I've already seen in the building. And at this point, a more seasoned colleague comes and sits between us, and she starts to get involved in the conversation. And he is asking her questions, and she finally writes to him and says, look, there are ICE agents in the building. Whatever you do, plead your case, because if your case is dismissed, they will probably pick you up. And he can't understand this. And he says, but I'm a good person. I'm not a criminal. I'm going through the process. Why would they go after me? And I'll never forget how this colleague responded. She said, I'm sorry. It is no longer a fair or just country. I was bowled over by her saying that. I thought, why is she telling him that? I mean, this guy is struggling to find hope as it is. Why is she telling him that it's so perilous? Well, I figured out very quickly why she told him that. Because when he went before the judge, he didn't just plead his case, he pled for his life. He told the judge, he said, look, I can't go back to my own country. My family's on the other side of the authoritarian regime that's there, and we've all fled to different countries. And if I go back, they'll definitely imprison me and they'll probably kill me. And the judge said that she believed him, but she was sorry, and his case was dismissed. He lingered in the courtroom after she said that. He didn't want to leave, and four or five of us clergy who had just been trained to do this surrounded him as he finally exited the courtroom. And as we left that courtroom, my hand was on his back, and right outside the door, an ICE agent was waiting, grabbed him. Another agent was there. Another agent was there with them, and the three of those agents took that young man down that back stairway, and we could hear his cries coming up through the stairwell. And we won't ever forget the feel of my hand being pulled away from his back. I want to tell you that we have people who have been kind enough, people right in the congregation even, because there are a number of folks in our congregation who are witnessing at the courthouse in this way. But those folks have kept this young man in a network of care. They know where he is, they've been in contact with him, they've been trying to do what they can, and I am so grateful for that. But each time I hear an update on him, I think of all the people who have been taken who are not being held in a network of care. All the people and the numbers have added up so quickly that have been snatched, who are lost somewhere in that system. When I think of that young man that day, when I think of what we're trying to do at the immigration courthouse for other people, what I realize is that we are simply there to witness. If we're able to offer some other kind of concrete support or help along the way, then fantastic. But with the numbers so large and the human resources so small, often all we can do is witness. We can be fully present to what we are seeing. And by being present, we can let the people who are at risk know that somebody cares. You know, this idea of witnessing in this way has deep roots. I think about liberation theology as it was first named in the 20th century. I think of the South American theologian Gustavo Gutierrez. He was Peruvian. He was a very educated man, tried several careers, and finally became a Dominican priest. And after being educated in other parts of the world, he returned to Peru. And what he noticed there was the incredible disparity between the haves and the have nots. And it enraged him. He started to rethink all the theological ideas that were both explicit and implicit in the Christian faith of the time. And he determined that most of those theological ideas were too focused on the idea of an afterlife, that it was all about working toward getting to heaven. And very few of those ideas really grappled with the reality of being here on earth and struggling in the way that these folks who were in poverty, who were being oppressed, were struggling, while those in power led very different kind of life. So what Gutierrez said was that God was actually with these poor, oppressed people. Not only was God with these folks, but God's attention was actually focused on these people. God was right there in their midst. And this was a revolutionary idea. Now, I know the idea of God certainly may not work for all or many Unitarian Universalists these days, but what I think we can translate that to is the idea of where we put our attention, where we put our attention in maybe the most sacred or holy way, where our laser focus is. And so what liberation theology tells us is that where we should be paying the most attention is to people who are oppressed, who are struggling, that place is worthy of the highest level of attention. And when we pay attention, when we really witness, as we're talking about today, we witness what these folks are going through. It's not just passive observation. What we're actually doing is positioning ourselves in solidarity with these folks. We're right there alongside them. And when we do that, we show them not only that we care for them, but it actually allows us to be changed in the process. Whether it means that we expand our sense of what needs to be rectified, whether it means that we reaffirm the values at our core, or that we make a new commitment to values, whatever it is, when we are in that position, it helps us to become more of who we can be as compassionate human beings. And all of this comes down to the idea that in liberation theology that we're not focused on what happens in the afterlife. We're focused on the here and now. We're focusing on trying to make the world a better place for everyone right now. And also, the idea is that until all of us are free, none of us is free. Until every one of us is liberated, none of us is liberated. Now, you may say to me, Reverend Jason, that all sounds very good, but what does that really mean? Because it seems like there are people right now who are definitely not free, and there seem to be other people who have the freedom to do whatever they want. And I know it seems that way, but I'm going to talk to you about why I think those people, even those people who seem like they have the kind of freedom that allows them to do whatever they want, make whatever selfish decision they want to make, that those folks really aren't liberated. So back to the courthouse, back to, it was several visits later, and it was a strange morning at that courthouse. There was a tension in the air. I felt it. I was in a courtroom with a judge, and the judge was feeling tense. I think everyone was feeling tense because of ICE's presence in the building. Because you have to remember, they kind of take over. Security can't do anything. Uh, the judges and the attorneys and the staff members and so on all end up having to defer to ICE in these situations. So I'm in the courtroom and the judge is asking me who I am. And at this point, we were still trying to figure out if we were required to identify ourselves or not. And I'm not sure the judge knew if he had the right to make me identify myself. And I wasn't sure if I could be anonymous in that setting. And so it was a whole big thing. And I left the courtroom, and it was just a very strange time. The attorney came and spoke with me, and she said she thought the judge was actually on my side. We were on the same side, but the judge was concerned about having people in the courtroom who we didn't know who they were because he didn't want ICE in the courtroom and so on. So it's just all a big, tense, strange mess in the courthouse that day. So two of my colleagues at that point were waiting outside the courtroom door for a young woman that they had connected with earlier. Now, both of these were women colleagues, and one was wearing a clerical collar, the other was wearing a large religious symbol around her neck. And they had a conversation with this young woman, and they were planning on escorting her to her car after her case was over. Not illegal, as far as I know, at the moment in the United States. So they're waiting there, and the door finally opens, and this young woman comes out of the courtroom, and they both they offer her their arms and smile, and she smiles at them and starts to take their arms. And as this happens, one of the ICE agents runs up, grabs one of these women colleagues, grabs her by the neck, pushes her up against the wall. She's standing up on her tiptoes, and he's screaming at her. He's enraged. He's shouting swear words and just screaming at this woman as though she had, I don't know, it just the response was so extreme. So meanwhile, they're taking this young woman. They're grabbing her and taking her down the back stairs. There's a few other agents there, and as this is happening with my colleague, one of my other colleagues comes running over to help. And as this person does so, a couple of ICE agents grab them and take them down the back stairway. And as this is happening, that an original agent who was so enraged tells all of us that we're arrested, that we have to leave the building with him, and we're all arrested. So I'm walking down the stairway in this immigration courthouse, and I'm thinking, I don't think they can arrest me, but then I'm not sure what kind of country I live in anymore. I'm an American citizen, but will that even matter at this moment? I mean, will I be still taken away in a white van with these other folks? But see, the thing is, if I'm taken away, I know at this point that I will probably be released fairly quickly, and I have people who will fight to make sure I'm out. And I think about all the people who are in those vans who don't have those privileges. But we're walking down the stairs, and all this is going through my mind, and I don't know whether we're truly being arrested. I don't know what's happening. And this man, this original ICE agent, who was so furious that these two women dared to offer their arms to this woman for an escort to her car, he's still spewing all of this hateful rhetoric. He's talking about drug cartels in Mexico and the things that they do. And I'm thinking, how is he connecting this woman who they had just picked up, who was not from Mexico, with these drug cartels? The whole thing of conflating all of this into the absolute worst of humanity. And I realized in that moment that this man has been conditioned by the kind of news that he's been watching for however long, conditioned by his training as an ICE agent. And what I also see now is that someone who is operating from that kind of bigoted, hateful ideology is not free, my friends. He is not liberated. This man is anything but liberated. He's the perfect example of, until we are all free, none of us is free. This man, this man could not go home and have healthy relationships with family and friends. This is somebody who is haunted by this ideology, getting in the way of any compassion that he has left, any ability to love or care for others. There is no doubt that he is anything but free. So what I know you know is that what's happening at the immigration courthouse is much bigger than one ICE agent who's enraged, or even what's happening to the immigrants there, as big of a problem as that is. That this is all part of a larger picture, a drift toward authoritarianism. And we know this because authoritarianism traditionally targets vulnerable groups. This is the way that authoritarians consolidate power. It normalizes cruelty as deterrence. It shrinks the space for compassion and justice. And this is all a danger to the whole idea of a democratic society that is rooted in human dignity. And I mean, I guess for me, the thing about immigrants at the courthouse is recognizing that when we allow some people to be treated as less than human, we erode protections for everyone. We just can't allow that. Once we start dehumanizing one group, then another and another will follow. But the thing I want to tell you all that I think is so empowering for us as Unitarian Universalists is that we actually know how to do this work. It is in our history. It is in our makeup, if you will. And I'm going to tell you why. The symbol that I go back to in this moment is right here, the chalice, the UU chalice. This is something that we light every Sunday in our worship services at Tapestry. It's something that UU churches all over the globe light every Sunday. And I want to talk to you about how that came into being, because so often we forget the story of the chalice. So it was during World War II, and the Unitarian Service Committee, now known as the UUSC, but the USC then, wanted to do something in Europe to help people who were being affected by authoritarian and fascist regimes, the Nazis in particular. And so they set up offices in Europe, and they got involved in the resistance movement. They were helping people to escape. They were helping refugees to find safe harbors. And they were involved in all kinds of spy networks and so on. It was really almost like a movie or something, what they were doing at that time. And in fact, they were passing papers that were in code and so on. And they needed some sort of symbol to put on all of their paperwork and documentation so that it would look really official, whether it was papers that were trying to get people out of a country or get them to safety, or whether it was a coded message or what have you. And of course, they were new over there, and they needed everything they could to muster legitimacy as a religious organization. So meanwhile, there is a man, Austrian artist named Hans Deutsch, And Hans had lived in Paris, and he was drawing really scathing satirical cartoons of Hitler there in Paris. So when the Nazis invaded Paris, you can imagine Hans was out of there as quick as he could be, and he moved from country to country. But he finally landed with the Unitarian Service Committee, and he was deeply impressed by all of their work. And you got to remember, this is a guy that had never been to a Unitarian service. He'd never heard a sermon, but he was moved by the faith and action that he saw. So they commissioned him to create a symbol for the work that they were doing over there. And the symbol he came up with, drawing upon ancient Greek and Roman flaming chalices, was the flaming chalice, which he saw as a symbol of perseverance with the flame, a symbol of sacrifice with the chalice. And he felt that it was a fitting image to connect with the work that Unitarians were doing there in Europe at that time. And of course, as we know, it caught on. And in fact, it became such a symbol of safety for people that there are stories of people drawing in the dirt outside of cottages a flaming chalice so that people who were seeking a safe place knew that this was somewhere that they could go and know that they would be protected. This, folks, is our legacy. This is work that we have done before. It's part of who we are. That chalice has been a symbol of our witness to the resistance to authoritarianism for a long, long time. Let us know that this is part of who we are. Now, the truth of this moment is that I know that not everybody can go to the immigration courthouse. And frankly, at this point, so many people have answered the call. I don't think that's where the need is. And for safety reasons and other reasons, it's not the right fit for everyone. But I think we can witness in this moment. And I think we should. I think we are called to witness in more ways than just appearing at the immigration courthouse. I think we need to witness at policy meetings. We need to be present and paying attention to what our decision makers are doing. You know, it's a scary time for people. Somebody might be trans, they might be an immigrant naturalized citizen, uh, a person of color. There's lots of reasons why people might be fearful right now. And witnessing can look like accompanying those folks to an appointment, whatever kind of appointment it may be. It's a scary time for people. So think about how you might be present to the network of people in your life who might be feeling frightened right now and could use someone who is next to them as a witness. We can witness by writing and speaking out against the cruelty we are seeing. We can witness by offering sanctuary and aid. I mean, just on a daily basis, I think we can stop and pause and witness what's happening in our world. I know for me, I had a moment like that where I read a story about the Smithsonian and how they were sweeping it for exhibits and information that was considered too woke. And I read the story and I think it just sort of piled up in my head on top of all the other things. And I thought, no, I'm going to stop and I'm really going to think about this moment. And I did, and I stopped and I took it in. And I thought about the fact that it echoed other moments in history that are so concerning and alarming. I thought about what it meant that intellectual freedom and reason are so at risk at the moment. I thought about the fact that it was a museum, one of our top, if not top museum in the country, and that it was being subjected to this sort of purging of ideas and information. And I really felt like I witnessed that in that moment. And like I said before, when we witness something, it actually helps us to get better in touch with our own values, our own sense of self. So when I encourage you to witness today, what I'm asking you to do is not to, break down your spirit by taking in everything, but I'm asking you to be present enough to what's happening in our country, specifically at the moment, that it doesn't just slide by unnoticed. That when you witness it, you become more connected or recommitted to your own sense of values. And I want to tell you something. When you are able to look on something with compassion, not just empathy, but compassion, then you actually can find yourself recharged in the process. And compassion is looking on something with empathy, but also casting love on it at the same time. So when we look at an immigrant who is being taken from the courthouse, we can feel empathy for their plight, but we can also offer them love from our spirit. And when we do that, that helps us to re energize, refuel ourselves so that we can continue to be witnesses in this important moment. Witnessing is about refusing to look away. It's about refusing to pretend that what's happening now is normal. And as we know, folks, we have our chalice that tells us we know how to be a witness. We have done this before as a faith movement, and we can do this again. The important thing is that we nurture and nourish our souls in the center of ourselves so that we can continue to do the work of witnessing, so that we can continue to keep this flame burning, so that we make sure that it never goes out.